Well, hi there. These tiny little shrimp, they don't look like much, but they're full of surprises. And I don't mean to say that they aren't cool looking. These are true shrimp, and I'll be honest, I think shrimps look cool. And yes, the word shrimp pluralizes just like the word fish, and I know that will bother some of you. I didn't invent the language, I just speak it. But I don't think I've ever seen a decapod that I didn't think looked pretty cool, and volcano shrimp are no exception. Not only do they have a proper shrimp shape, but they have a beautiful red coloration. They aren't very big. They don't even get to be 2 centimeters long. So they're not big, but they're incredible. In fact, they're so incredible that the first time I saw them, they were trapped inside of a sealed glass ball for sale at the Sharper Image, alive. Which is, for the record, not the way to keep any animal. In almost all cases, a shrimp should be dead under such conditions within just a few hours, days at most. Not these though. These are amazing. They could live like that for years. Probably just a few years, but literal years. With proper care, they should live much longer than that, which is crazy. But the fact that they could live for years under such conditions has to tell you something about how tough these seemingly unspectacular shrimp really are. In the wild, they live in small pools in Hawaii where the temperatures and water conditions can fluctuate dramatically. And while we've discussed other crustaceans that live extremely short lives in little pools, these can live for multiple decades. So are they big? No. Are they beautiful? Yes. Are they tough as nails? You betcha. Are they the best pet for you? That's the question that we need to answer. And if you had to guess which of my friends keeps and breeds Hawaiian volcano shrimp, who would you guess? You're right, he does. And here he is, Russ from Aquarimax Pets, to help us give the Hawaiian volcano shrimp a score based on our 5 categories, which are handleability, care, hardiness, availability, and upfront costs. When it comes to handleability, we give the Hawaiian volcano shrimp a score of 3 out of 5, which, I mean, sounds like a lot, because the reality is you're not probably going to scoop these up and have the tiniest little experience, but you could. I guess that's the thing. They're not difficult to handle. If you need to move them from one enclosure to another, you get a little net and, scoop some up. They can't survive indefinitely out of the water. They will desiccate pretty quickly. They're very small, and so they've got a lot of surface area for their little tiny volume. And so they can dry out quickly, but if you're keeping them out for a minute or two and putting them in another tank, they're going to be fine. They're still going to be able to breathe. Everything's going to be all right. They're very easy to handle. Nothing about it sounds fun for anyone involved. It's going to be stressful. You're not going to handle them for the thrill of handling volcano shrimp, but they're not dangerous. You're potentially very, very dangerous to them, but they're fairly tough for a tiny little creature. Does that sound about right?
Yeah.
Russ has convinced me that Hawaiian volcano shrimp are the best pet shrimp for me. And so these are my Hawaiian volcano shrimp that he has brought to me, but he got them out of their tank before, brought them all the way here. We got them acclimated all day today, and then you're the one that introduced them to the tank, so I've never handled them. What is it like?
Well, capturing them can be a little tricky because they are very likely to dart backwards extremely quickly.
Like crayfish.
Yeah, much like crayfish. So catching them can be a little bit tricky, and sometimes it's best to use a net and then something else to kind of guide them, tease them, hold the net behind them, tease them from the front, and then they'll dart back right into the net. So that's maybe a trick that can help.
That is my childhood, just so you know. I grew up by a lake in Colorado. I caught crayfish all the time for fun, and then later I had snapping turtles and things, and so I caught a lot of crayfish. And my whole thing was I had a big net, and I had a little net. And I'd flip a rock, and I'd find a crayfish. I'd put the big net behind the crayfish, and then I'd go towards it with the little net, and they'd shoot back there. And it's nice to see that's exactly the way that you'll handle these tiny little micro guys.
Just miniaturize the entire process.
Yes.
And you're good.
You have one tiny net and one net that's so small you can't see it. I love it. Well, that sounds easy enough.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to stick with the 3. Now, when it comes to care, and this is a big part of the selling point for me, these get the most emphatic 5 I've ever given to anything. Like, I was seriously like, do I give bonus points on top? Because, well, I mean, any animal that can live for years sealed inside of a glass sphere, receiving 0 care,
Right.
has to even make tarantulas look obscenely difficult to care for. But I want you to talk to me about everything, because you've already explained it to me. You've sold me on them. What is it like caring for possibly the world's easiest animal to care for?
Right. Well, once you have an aquarium that is set up, it's established, and everything is going the way it should be going already, basically, there are 2 things you need to do for the life of the aquarium, potentially for decades. One is feed the shrimp very sparingly, maybe 1 to 4 times a month, a very, very small amount of food.
What kind of food?
And you can get specific shrimp food if you want to, but I tend to just use fish food, and it works great, like a very small pellet of fish food that you would drop in there. And if you do that, especially in the early life of the aquarium when there aren't very many shrimp in there, you would just do that maybe once a month. And I would wait a couple of months. Now that we put the shrimp in here, I would wait a couple of months before you even feed them at all. But once they start needing food, you feed them once a month or so. And as the population grows, you feed them a little bit more, but not a lot. And then you would top off the water. You have this nice glass lid, which allows for gas exchange, but reduces evaporation. So you can top this off with distilled water as it evaporates, which of course it will do very slowly.
And that's a key, right? That it be distilled water.
Distilled water, right? That is key. And that's it. You don't have to do water changes, as I keep a lot of aquatic creatures for which I do water changes on a pretty regular basis. It's important for them, not for these shrimp in these conditions.
So once the enclosure is established, it drops to feed them a tiny amount of fish food once a month, and whatever water happens to be evaporating out through the tiny little gaps in the lid here, replace with some distilled water every so often, and that's it.
That is it.
So I guess the whole thing comes down to, how do I establish this tank?
Right. And that comes into more into play with the hardiness and so on, because basically to set it up, you'll need water that is approximately half the salinity of seawater.
Okay.
And so you get distilled water and a good marine salt mix or a reef mix that you couldn't use, like aquarium salt for freshwater tanks. It's used for treating diseases. You couldn't use table salt or anything like that. It would have to be good marine salt mix
For a saltwater aquarium.
for a saltwater aquarium.
And you're describing brackish water here.
Right.
Which is not as salty as ocean water, but not as less as fresh water.
Right.
Okay.
And you're looking approximately halfway between fresh and marine strength.
How do you
Doesn't have to be
establish that?
exact, but most of the marine salts come with, this is how much, you put half a cup in for a gallon or whatever, and that varies based on the particular mix. But you do that, and then you just dilute it with distilled water. And it is important to start with distilled water or RO water or some other very pure water. You don't want to use tap water. That's a pitfall that people can fall into. That can kill them. And once you've mixed that up, you add some substrate that contains calcium. This is aragonite sand, which contains calcium. There are other ways to get that calcium in there, but some form of calcium carbonate in there. And then you let it sit. You can speed up the process a little bit by adding some of this algae that we added some months ago. We started by adding some of that, and some I brought here today as well. You can add snails. There are some Malaysian trumpet snails in here, which in brackish water reproduce and grow very, very slowly, especially with the low nutrient levels in here. We added some months ago when we started setting up this tank.
There's been hardly any recruitment.
Right. So you don't have to worry about them overpopulating a tank as you would in a more eutrophic freshwater tank. And then once you've done that and you begin to see the growth of algae on the glass and so on, it's time for shrimp. So it might be 6 weeks, it might be 2 or 3 months, something like that. Once you've gotten to that point, then you can introduce the shrimp.
Okay, so I'll go through everything, make sure I've got it all right. So you need some sort of a substrate that has calcium carbonate in it.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to need like very, very pure water, reverse osmosis water or distilled water, and you're going to add that with salt, aquarium safe salt for saltwater tanks, but about half the quantity that you would use to make saltwater.
Right.
And then you can add some algae, some snails, potentially like these trumpet snails, and just let it cycle until algae and things start to grow, and then you're ready to add your shrimp. So probably a big pitfall would be adding your shrimp too soon.
Mm-hmm.
But once that's set up, it's basically good to go. And then this is a thing, I think you've made it pretty clear, but just so people that maybe aren't aware of this, when water evaporates, the salt stays.
Right.
So when you're adding more water later, you're not adding more salt. If you're adding salt water every time, eventually you're going to end up with a salt lake in here, and you'll kill everybody. Though these guys seem to be massively tolerant of different levels of salinity. So that's why you're not like, it has to be exactly this. You're saying somewhere in between.
Right, somewhere near about 50%, but I've kept them at lower salinities at which they've bred, higher salinities at which they've bred, so it is very possible. One thing, when you're mixing the salt in, you need to make sure the salt is very thoroughly mixed with that water.
Mm.
So if you fail to do that, then you can get a kind of a extremely saline layer down at the bottom.
Where they are.
So I recommend mixing it in a bucket with a pump or an air stone or something thoroughly before you put it into the tank. So make sure the salt is thoroughly dissolved before you do that.
So right up front, there's a little bit of knowing what you're doing. And if you can watch an Aquarimax Pets video or this video and do that, the rest of for decades,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't get any easier.
Right.
Definitely stand by that 5. So, okay, once you have them, individuals live 20 years.
They can, yeah, or more.
But if you're like, but I want my colony to last for parrot kind of time, you're going to have to breed them.
Right.
What's that like?
It's extremely easy as long as you have males and females, and generally when you have 12, 15 plus shrimp, you're going to have males and females. You just follow the care regimen. The females will start carrying eggs, as most shrimp do. They refer to them as berried shrimp once they have those.
Because they're a little red.
They're little bright red berry-like eggs. And the female will carry those around for a while. After a couple of months, she will release them as little planktonic larvae that float with their head down, tail up. And they don't
So
really
they look
have
like brine
walking
shrimp
legs.
or something kind of?
Kind of like that, yeah. And they don't have walking legs. They have these little, they almost like cilia, and they just kind of float around in the water column, and they don't require any additional care. After a couple of weeks,
Of course not.
they will just settle down into miniature shrimp. That once they molt, they'll look like miniature shrimp, and then they'll just grow up. The adults don't bother them. They don't require any additional care at all. So
it sounds like to breed them, you need to do nothing.
Right.
Okay, if you let's talk about the opposite. If you wanted to keep them from breeding,
Mm-hmm.
what would you do?
I don't think that would be feasible, but a nice thing.
Keep one.
Yeah, just keep one. And it would have to be either a male or a female that hadn't mated.
Yeah.
But if you don't want to worry about them overpopulating, you don't really have to, because they tend to regulate their population. So if you could keep 100 in here, honestly, without any problems. But if once you reach a population level that is, getting close to causing a strain on the little micro ecosystem you have here, they will slow down and not breed much or at all until some of them die off, and then the process can start again. So self-regulating populations, kind of a bonus.
How do these exist? These are amazing.
Yeah, if you wanted to invent the easiest pet, this comes pretty close.
Yeah. How does it get any easier?
It doesn't.
Almost every week, we have an entire extra video just for our Stinkin' Rad fans at Patreon called Patreon Extras. And this animal, I can tell you, is a really exciting one that has a lot of the other members of our team very, very excited to learn more. And so we've got Russ here. We have an extended awesome conversation that turns into a whole extra video. Sometimes these videos are even better than the main video. It's sometimes I wish they were the main video after we get done with them because they are so much fun. And if you're interested in seeing this video or any of the other Patreon extras videos that we have, please consider checking out our Patreon. When it comes to hardiness, I'm going with a 5 also, because I mean, how can a tiny little shrimp be any hardier than this? It's not going to be as emphatic because these are the easiest pet I've ever seen for an actually alive animal.
I would agree with that, yeah.
But for hardiness, there are a few mistakes you can make. What are those?
Well, we already mentioned you should use purified water like reverse osmosis or distilled water when you're making the mix. Using tap water can kill them. Another one, failure to allow the tank to mature before you add them can also kill them.
Yep.
And then overfeeding could also kill them. So if you avoid those 3 pitfalls, and of course extremes of temperature and throwing this across the room, something like that, you avoid those kinds of extremes. And they can stand quite cool temperatures. But any sort of reasonable room temperature, they're going to be fine. Up into the mid 80s, they're going to be fine. Down into the 40s, they will be fine, as long as it's gradual. But general comfortable room temperature somewhere between 65 and 80 or so, they're going to be totally fine.
And these are all in Fahrenheit, not Kelvins.
Right. Kelvins would change the game a bit.
Okay, so the only thing in there that I think is potentially not totally straightforward is how much feeding is overfeeding. And you said a very tiny amount, about once a month is what's right. And maybe not to feed them at all for the first couple of months after they go in there. So overfeeding, like if you're feeding them more than once a month, you're going crazy with the food.
and I have colonies, mature colonies with many shrimp, a fairly high density of shrimp, where I will feed them once or even twice a week. And that's fine because I'm feeding a very, very small amount of food.
Yeah.
But one rule of thumb is that if the shrimp do not swarm the food when you're feeding them,
they're not hungry.
They're not hungry, and you're probably overfeeding them. And if you put a large pellet of food, like you put an algae chip in there, that is gross overfeeding.
Yeah.
Put a very small sinking pellet in there, probably not overfeeding. But with a colony that's this young, it would be very easy to overfeed them.
Can you give me a ballpark of like how long should that food sit in there? So I put it in there. No, I mean if I put it in there and they haven't eaten it in 10 minutes.
If you've seen no interest in 10 minutes, they're not hungry.
Well, what about how long it's just there at all? Like if they come in there eating on it, but they're still working on it in an hour, is that too much food?
Not necessarily, but if it's not gone within a few hours, I would probably take it out.
Okay.
Generally, when I drop a food pellet into my tanks, there's a ball of shrimp on it within a few minutes, and they continue to eat until it's gone.
I really like that. That's going to help, I think, a lot of people. Just if you feed it and they don't swarm to it, they're not hungry.
Right.
Stop feeding them.
And remove that food, yeah.
If you forgot to feed them, because that's the thing, when you have something that you care for so irregularly, I could see somebody being like, oh, it's been 3 months, I haven't fed my shrimp.
And they'll probably be totally fine.
So it's difficult to underfeed them, because they're going to eat all the algae that's growing in here and things like that.
They're going to nibble on that, yeah.
Would this algae here eventually start to be eaten?
They tend not to eat this, but it also grows extremely slowly.
Okay.
It's a specific type of algae. I'm not sure of the identification, but a lot of keepers of these shrimp use this algae. It comes from petshrimp.com that also sells the shrimp. At any rate, they don't tend to eat it, but it can be kind of a barometer of conditions because it will grow very slowly, but it will continue to grow if there are enough nutrients in there. If it starts to die back, you should probably feed your shrimp. It's probably about time. There's not enough nutrients for the algae to grow.
I suppose my last question just about them is, what about oxygen? How is it just from the plants?
There is, because this is not a tight seal, there's some oxygen.
So it's dissolving enough. So they just have really low...
They have very low oxygen requirements. They are, of course, going to get some from the algae as well, but that is why they can survive in those sealed containers that are not really appropriate for them, but why they survive for a very long time. Very modest oxygen requirements, and whatever algae does grow in there gives them some of that.
Awesome. Now, when it comes to availability, that's where they fall off a little bit. These I've never seen these in a pet store. I've never seen them at an expo, but they are out there.
Right.
They are out there. If you want to get Hawaiian volcano shrimp right now, can you do it?
Yeah, and you can get them captive bred, which is preferable.
Now, I know one person who breeds them and who has supplied me with these Hawaiian volcano shrimp that I'm really, really excited about. And so, can people come to you?
Yeah, yeah. And I have decent quantities of them. I don't have unlimited quantities of them, so there might be times when I'm low or things like that. But I do have several hundred on hand at any given time, usually. And there are people who breed them in commercial quantities too.
And you just started breeding these how many decades ago?
Well, let's see. I started keeping them about 20 years ago, and within 2 or 3 years, I was breeding them regularly.
So you're just starting to dabble in them.
Yeah.
Kind of. Well, that's really exciting. So yeah, we're going to give them a 3 out of 5 for availability. If you want to get some, you can get some from Aquarimax. Where would they go to get those from you?
Aquarimax.com.
And so it seems like they're available. You're just probably not going to find them at the pet shop.
Right.
And that's okay, because once you find them once, you never need to find them again. When it comes to upfront costs, I'm giving these a 5 out of 5.
Oh, yeah.
How much does a starter colony of just the shrimp cost?
Each individual shrimp, depending on where you get it from, is usually around $250. Something like that. And you want to start out with 10, 12, 15, maybe more.
So if you've got a $30 budget, you can go pretty crazy getting shrimp. And then the rest of this setup, I mean, it's one of the least expensive setups you can get. So this is a 2.5 gallon aquarium. You could probably go nuts and get a 5.5.
Yeah, I have one group in a 10 gallon.
Whoa!
And I have one in a 5.5. I have one in a 3 gallon vase.
Because why not?
You can do them in almost any container. So.
And this is one of the least expensive glass boxes you can purchase.
Right.
You're going to need a little aquarium salt, a little calcium carbonate sand, and some algae, and then some trumpet snails.
And those last two are kind of optional.
Yeah, then you're done. And you're gonna need the smallest quantity of fish food that you can possibly purchase. Just ask them if they have a sample. It'll last you 3 years. Yeah, can you give me a sample? It's definitely a 5. Oh well, Russ, I'm so excited about these. These seem like just the easiest pet ever, and yet they're busy. They're engaging, like they're constantly doing something.
Right, and that's 24/7. They never calm down. There's always activity. Doesn't matter when.
Well, this is why overall we give the Hawaiian volcano shrimp a score of 4.2 out of 5. These are super fun, but this might not be the absolute most fun pet that you could possibly get. But is it the lowest maintenance pet that you can get?
I would say so.
I mean, if we're referring to actual living animals, this seriously might be. And it isn't like this isn't a rad animal. I mean, it's way more fun to watch, honestly, than a tarantula, and I love tarantulas, and this makes tarantulas seem like high maintenance pets. So if you want the lowest maintenance animal that isn't in some state of prolonged suspended animation and actually does things on a continual basis, let alone a daily basis, that you could watch and enjoy, then the Hawaiian volcano shrimp might be not only the best pet arthropod, but the best pet animal for you. As always, like and subscribe, and we hope to see you real soon. There's just no reason not to have these. Like, why? What would be the decision? It's like, well, sometimes I like to leave town for 3 months at a time. Oh, that wouldn't even be a problem. Okay, right. What is my reason that I don't have these? No reason. There's no reason. I didn't have $11. You could have got a vase at the dollar store. Okay, fine, I'll get them. There's no reason.